Harvard now teaches her medical theory, but she first wrote it beside a dying cornfield, with a busted radio and a brain full of questions. No mentors, no heater, just a broken radio, a frozen Iowa sky, and a girl who would not stop asking why. January in Iowa is not just cold, it is quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that settles into your bones and makes a home out of loneliness. The cornfields had long turned to dry stalks and black soil. The wind didn't whistle. It scraped, and in a small wooden farmhouse at the end of a frozen gravel road, the kitchen was dark. There was no sound of the morning kettle, no warmth from the stove, no voice humming softly from the woman who used to cook before dawn. June's mother had died 3 months ago. Ovarian cancer, stage 4. Too late, the doctor said. Too silent, June thought. Her father never recovered. He did not cry. He did not speak. He simply poured himself a drink and vanished into the quiet. June, 13 years old, stayed behind, alone. She learned not to wait for anyone. Each morning she lit the fire. She cooked simple food. She did not speak much at school, but every afternoon she pedaled her bike 6 miles to the town library, across frozen earth and sharp winter winds, just to sit in the only warm room left in her life. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. Mostly she read to forget. Until one day, she found a forgotten book, thin, dusty, the cover torn at the edges. Introduction to Molecular Genetics. No one had checked it out since 1993. She carried it home like a bird with a broken wing. That night, she crawled into the old chicken coop behind the house, her nightly refuge from the cold, and opened the book under the flicker of a half-dead flashlight. The coop smelled of straw, rust, and feathers, but it was the only place where the wind didn't reach. She didn't understand much at first. Words like replication, nucleotides, transcription meant nothing. They sounded like spells from a world she had no key to. But June read on. Slowly, the words turned to shapes. The shapes became rhythms. DNA, she realized, was not just a chemical code. It was a kind of music. And mutations? They were wrong notes in a song that should have been beautiful. Toward the end of the book, there was a short section on PCA, Principal Component Analysis, a statistical method used to reduce high-dimensional data, a way to find patterns too complex for the human eye. June didn't fully understand the math, but she understood the question it could answer. What if we could find cancer before it becomes cancer? She thought of her mother's blood tests, normal, 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 until suddenly, fatal. What if those numbers had changed earlier, in ways no one thought to look for? What if the body whispers before it screams? On a sheet of yellowing notebook paper, she began to sketch a theory. Use RNA expression data from women with high cancer risk. Apply PCA to detect subtle shifts. Track early-stage divergence, genomic drift that no one was watching for. She had no one to show it to. So she posted it on an open-access science forum under the username Iowa Chick. She wasn't seeking attention. She wasn't even sure it made sense. She only knew she had to ask the question out loud, because no one had answered it when her mother was alive. 3 weeks passed. The coop got colder. The flashlight dimmed. But June kept reading. She read about mRNA, the messenger that carried genetic instructions like sheet music to the body's musicians. If the song is copied wrong, she whispered into the straw, the body plays it wrong. She didn't cry that night, but she wrote a line in her notebook that would stay with her forever. Cancer does not arrive suddenly. It leaves footprints. We just never learn to look. She had no way of knowing, but her post had quietly reached the inbox of someone who had spent decades studying cancer biology, and who had long since stopped being surprised by Harvard students, but still believed in being surprised by the unknown. One morning, June returned from the barn to find a blinking email icon on the family's old desktop. The sender: Dr. Elisa Monroe, Department of Biomedical Sciences, Harvard University. Subject: Let's talk soon. June stared at it for 10 minutes. She didn't know where Harvard was. She only knew it was a place her mother once mentioned when talking about scientists who saved lives. She typed a reply, slow and honest. I don't have internet at home, but I can borrow Wi-Fi next door if you want to Zoom. 3 days later, June sat in the neighbor's kitchen wearing a frayed sweater and holding a laptop with a cracked screen. Dr. Monroe appeared on the other side of the call, a woman in her 60s, hair silver, eyes sharp, voice gentle. Are you Iowa chick? June nodded. You wrote that paper? Another nod. Why? June looked into the screen. She didn't try to sound smart. She didn't use any big words. She said simply, because I want to understand why my mother died. There was a long pause. Then Monroe leaned back, closed her eyes, and said softly, That's the best reason I've ever heard. The call ended without promises. No acceptance letters. No dramatic offers. But something had shifted. June closed the laptop, sat still, then slowly folded her arms on the table and rested her head. For the first time in months, she cried. Not because she felt lost, but because someone, somewhere, had heard her, not as a child, but as a voice worth listening to. Outside, the snow kept falling. The wind howled past the cornfields. But inside the chicken coop, a small light still burned, and in the hands of a 13-year-old girl, a medical theory had just been born. The cornfields were still asleep under snow. February had begun, but Iowa remained frozen in place, as though the world itself had stopped spinning for the winter. June was standing on a step stool in the kitchen, trying to unjam the stove flue, when the neighbor, Mr. Halverson, knocked on the door with a strange smile. Kid, he said, holding up his old iPad. Someone from Harvard just asked if you'll join a Zoom call. June didn't say anything for a moment. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, took the iPad, and looked at the email. From Dr. Elisa Monroe. Subject, Your Theory on Early Drift Detection. Dear Iowa, Chick, we would like to speak with you about your model. Would you be available for a Zoom call this Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern? Warmly, Elisa Monroe, Ph.D., Department of Biomedical Sciences, Harvard Medical School. Mr. Halverson cleared a space on his kitchen table for her that Thursday. He didn't ask questions. He didn't make small talk. He just put a space heater under the table and a folded napkin with a peanut butter sandwich beside the laptop. When the Zoom window opened, the screen filled with the face of Dr. Monroe. No grand office behind her. Just a bookcase, a cup of tea, and the unmistakable presence of someone who had lived through many winters of her own. Hi, June, she said gently. June didn't know how she knew her real name. I didn't mean to lie, June said quietly. I just didn't think anyone would listen to a 13-year-old. Dr. Monroe smiled, not out of amusement, but respect. You're right. Most wouldn't. There were other people on the call, older, quieter faces, professors, researchers. One had gray hair and square glasses, another had a heavy Boston accent. June could hear someone typing in the background. Dr. B. Monroe asked the first question. How did you arrive at the idea of genomic drift? June adjusted the blanket over her lap. The kitchen was cold, even with the heater. I read about PCA in a book, she began slowly, and I kept thinking about how my mom's tests always looked normal, but she still got sicker. Something changed, just not something they were measuring. Another professor asked, "Did someone help you run the math? A teacher, maybe?" June shook her head. "I don't have a teacher right now," she said. "School's kind of—" She stopped. "It's not the place I think in." Someone laughed softly. Not unkindly. "Fair enough," said Dr. Monroe. "You wrote something in your post that struck us. You said, if cancer is a song played out of tune, maybe it starts with just one wrong note. Can you say more?" June looked down. Her voice dropped. I don't think cancer shows up like lightning. I think it creeps in. Like cold air through a crack in the wall. If we listened better, maybe we'd hear it sooner." There was silence. Then the man with the Boston accent leaned toward his webcam. "Well," he said, "you don't talk like a scientist. You talk like someone who lost someone." June nodded. "I did." The rest of the call was quieter. More technical questions. June didn't know every word, but she didn't pretend to. She never tried to impress them. She just told the truth. When the screen finally went dark, she sat still for a long time. The iPad battery died. The sandwich was cold. But something in her chest had changed. The fear that had curled itself around her ribs like frost. It had lifted, just a little. That night June returned to the chicken coop. The straw had frozen stiff. The roof was leaking again. But she didn't bring a flashlight this time. She just sat, knees to chest, arms wrapped tight, looking up through the slats in the wall. No stars. Only clouds. But in her mind, something had begun to shine. Harvard. Real professors, real questions. Someone was listening. The next day, Dr. Monroe emailed again. She said they wanted to send June a few things: a laptop, access to some software, and a set of digital data sets used in real oncology research. June stared at the screen. Her hands trembled. She whispered to no one, "This can't be real." But it was. And just like that, the girl in the chicken coop had become something else. Not a genius, not a prodigy, but something older, quieter, a researcher. No lab coat, no university badge, just a cracked screen, a borrowed heater, and a heart full of unanswered questions. The package arrived in a cardboard box with one torn corner and no return label. Mr. Halverson carried it in with both hands, careful like it held glass. "It says Harvard," he murmured, placing it on June's kitchen table. June just stood there. The box was too plain, too ordinary. She had expected something shinier, maybe. But when she opened it, she found 3 things that would quietly change her life. An old, refurbished laptop, a handwritten note, and a printed list of links to bioinformatics tools and data sets. The note read, "June. We thought you might want a better way to work. This isn't new, but it runs what you'll need. We've given you full access to a few platforms we use in our labs here: RNA sequencing datasets, visualization software, and a few internal tools used in cancer biology. It's not a course. There's no syllabus. But I don't think you need one. Just follow your questions. We're listening. E. Monroe." The laptop made a strange hum when it booted up. The screen was scratched, the keys uneven. But when June opened the browser and clicked the bookmarked links, an entirely new world unfolded in front of her. She was no longer reading dusty textbooks. Now she was looking at real data sets, rows and rows of numbers, gene expression matrices from real patients, many of them women who had donated blood samples before they knew they were sick. These were transcriptomic profiles, tables full of RNA counts, broken down by gene, condition, time point. At first, it all looked like noise. But June wasn't afraid of noise. She was afraid of silence. She knew what it meant when nobody paid attention, And so, she did what no one had taught her to do. She began learning. She found a YouTube channel run by a quiet bioinformatics postdoc in India who explained RNA-seq like someone teaching music. She downloaded free tools, DESEQ2, EdgeR, ggplot2. She Googled words like normalization and differential gene expression. Every night she came home from school, fed the chickens, reheated soup, and then returned to the laptop. And every night she sank deeper into the data. She learned that RNA is not just a message. It's a snapshot, a moment in time that captures what the cell is trying to say. And sometimes, what it's trying to say is, help. June's goal was simple: to take raw RNA-seq data from women in precancerous states, apply PCA, and see whether the resulting patterns, or principal components, showed any shift before clinical symptoms appeared. In other words, could she use math to listen to the whisper before the scream? Her chicken coop became her lab. Her flashlight became her desk lamp. Her silence became her discipline. And in this stillness, she wrote her first bioinformatics pipeline. No one assigned it. No one graded it. But step by step, she built a script that pulled RNA-seq data from a public repository, cleaned and normalized the counts, applied PCA to reduce dimensionality, plotted each patient as a data point on a 2D graph, colored the points by progression stage, healthy, pre-cancer, diagnosed. The result? A subtle curve, like wind bending a field of grass. Precancer samples did not stand still. They leaned, shifted slightly, trailing in the direction of the diagnosed group. A drift, barely perceptible. But it was there. Not proof, but possibility. And for June, that was enough. One night, after 3 hours of debugging a syntax error in her R script, she sat back against the chicken coop wall and stared at the ceiling. A single sentence ran through her head. If a cell changes before it dies, then maybe a life does too. She typed it into her notebook. Then below it, she wrote a name: Early Phase Genomic Drift Hypothesis. It wasn't a scientific paper. It wasn't peer-reviewed. It wasn't anything the world would notice. But for a girl who had nothing else left of her mother but an old shawl and a grave under the oak tree, it was a seed. And it had begun to grow. The next morning, she sent an email to Dr. Monroe. No subject line. No grand declaration. Just, I tried applying PCA on early phase samples. There's movement. It's small, but it's there. I don't know if I did it right, but I think I want to keep going. 15 minutes later, the reply came. Yes, keep going. There are no headlines for this part of the story. No applause, no cameras, only quiet. Only a young girl at the edge of a field, typing by flashlight, drawing a line no one else had seen. Not for fame, not for school, not even for herself. But for the one question that refused to let her sleep. Why did my mother die? And what if she didn't have to? June had never been published. She had never presented at a science fair, never joined a club, never stood in front of a room to explain what she was doing. But one quiet afternoon in March, her theory was mentioned. Not by her, but by someone else. Sarah Tran, a postdoctoral researcher in oncology at Harvard, had been reviewing open-source forums when she stumbled on the username Iowa Chick again. She'd seen it before, the genomic drift hypothesis. And this time, she read it carefully, side by side with June's pipeline results. She didn't know who June was. She only knew the math was clean. And more than that, the question was beautiful. Sarah shared the link in a Slack channel with a note. This is wild, but I think it might be real. Could someone be seeing early phase expression drift this clearly? She didn't expect a reply. She certainly didn't expect Dr. Alan Weiss to reply. Dr. Weiss was a giant in molecular biology, a tenured professor at Harvard, published in Nature and Cell more times than most people submitted homework. His lectures were legend. His critiques, feared. He clicked the link, he read the post, and his response was short, sharp. No child writes real molecular biology. This is speculative nonsense. Not science. Whoever wrote this doesn't understand variance matrices, let alone PCA. Shut this down before people start thinking bioinformatics is open mic night. June didn't see the message right away. But by evening, she noticed her forum post had been flooded with downvotes and comments questioning her identity, her education, her motives. Some called her a fraud. Some said she was copying someone else's work. One said, "Cute story. Now let the adults work." June read each line in silence. Then she closed the laptop. She didn't cry. She went outside. The snow was finally gone. The cornfields were still dead, but the earth had turned soft. Spring, it seemed, was beginning to breathe. She walked to the fence behind the coop, looked out over the field, and whispered, "I didn't ask to be believed. I only asked to know." Dr. Monroe called the next day. "I saw the thread," she said, calm but firm. June didn't say anything. "I want you to know that I read your pipeline. I reviewed your PCA code and I ran it myself." A pause. "You were right." June's breath caught. "There's drift," Monroe said. "Exactly where you said it would be." Still, June stayed quiet. "Weiss doesn't understand everything. He understands power. You understand pain. Those don't cancel each other out, June." Later that night, June received another email. It was from Sarah Tran. Subject line, "Quiet proof." Message, "Hey, you don't know me, but I think you're right. I just ran your model on a second data set. Different patient group, same early shift. They can call it cute or luck or beginner's intuition, but I call it signal. Keep going. If you want, I can help you validate more data sets. Quietly." Sarah. That night, the wind returned. But June didn't retreat into the coop. She stayed by the window with her notebook, sketching new questions. What if the drift isn't just visible? What if it's predictable? She wasn't angry. Not at Weiss. Not at the comments. She understood now. They didn't hate her. They feared the door she had opened, not because it was wrong, but because it came from a place they didn't control. 3 weeks later, a small journal for independent computational biology published a brief letter titled, "On Early Phase Genomic Drift in Ovarian RNA Sex Samples," by Iowa Chick, anonymous contribution. Data validated by S. Tran, Ph.D., commentary by E. Monroe, Ph.D. No headlines, no celebration, but Sarah printed it and taped it above her desk. And Dr. Monroe sent June a one-line email. Now, it's not just theory, it's data. June printed it too. She didn't tell her father. He hadn't been sober in weeks. But she folded the page gently, slid it into one of her mother's old cookbooks, and whispered, "You're still here, aren't you?" April arrived like a betrayal. The thaw came early that year, and with it, the wind changed. Not gentle, but tense, coiled. You could feel it in the fence posts, in the breath of the chickens, in the way the trees leaned before they broke. June was sitting in the coop when it hit. 1 minute she was debugging a piece of code in her drift model. The next, the sky went black, and a sound like a freight train rose from the west. The wind didn't knock. It tore. The first gust blew the coop door open. The second took the roof. She barely had time to grab the laptop. Everything else, notebooks, loose sheets, her mother's scarf, the rickety flashlight, lifted and scattered into the air like a flock of frightened birds. She ran, barefoot, into the house. Rain came in sheets. The power went out. Her father yelled something she couldn't make out from the living room. Or maybe he didn't yell at all. Maybe it was the storm talking now. She curled up in the hallway, clutching the laptop to her chest, listening to the storm try to tear the world apart. When it was over, the yard was unrecognizable. The coop had collapsed in on itself like an empty box. Mud swallowed the pages of her notebooks. The paper pulped. Her mother's handwriting melted into the soil. Years of thinking, scribbling, whispering into straw, gone. She stood there for a long time, staring. Then she knelt and picked up a single wet corner of a graph she had once drawn, PCA drift, sloping slightly to the right, smeared with rain. She didn't cry. Not this time. She walked back into the house, turned on the laptop, and waited for it to boot. It did. And there, saved under the cloud storage Harvard had given her, was everything she'd written. Every data set, every line of code, every chart. The storm had tested what she had built, and she had survived it. That evening, an email arrived. Subject: You're invited. From Dr. Elisa Monroe. June, we've nominated you to attend a small gathering of early innovators in biomedical science. Nothing flashy, just real people doing real work. It's in Boston in May. We'd love to fly you out, if you're willing. And before you say no, this isn't a scholarship. You're not applying to join something. You're already in. You're the work now. June stared at the screen. Boston. She had never left Iowa. She'd never seen the ocean, or an airport, or even stayed in a hotel. She didn't own a suitcase. She didn't know if her father would let her go, but she typed a reply. Yes. In the weeks that followed, the coop was never rebuilt. Instead, June cleared the space, planted a small patch of flowers, not for decoration, for memory. The seeds were from her mother's old garden box, untouched for years. Purple coneflowers, wild poppies, a single sunflower, which would struggle in the hard Iowa soil, but she planted it anyway. You plant things after storms, not because they'll always grow, but because you must. On May 3rd, she packed a borrowed duffel bag with 2 shirts, 1 sweater, and a notebook. Dr. Monroe had arranged the flight. Sarah Tran had messaged her with a list of names to expect. You'll be the youngest one there, she wrote. But I think that's the point. At the airport, a TSA officer glanced at her boarding pass, then back at her face. You flying alone? He asked. She nodded. Well, he said, handing it back. Make it count. From the plane window, she watched the fields turn to cities, watched rivers wind like DNA strands, watched clouds build and part like questions in her mind. By the time the plane touched down in Boston, she was no longer a girl in a coop. She was a scientist in motion. The lecture hall smelled like fresh paper and polished wood. June sat in the back row, her coat still damp from the spring rain. A name tag rested awkwardly on her sweater. J. Iverson, independent researcher. She hadn't wanted it, but Sarah Tran had insisted. Wear it, she said. You earned it. It was her first time in Boston. Her first time hearing scientists talk to one another in real time. Not in articles, not in videos, but live. Loud, sharp, confident. They spoke of protein folding algorithms, machine learning and genomics, biomarkers, pipelines, benchmarks. The words tumbled out like marbles on a lab floor. And June, seated with her knees crossed tightly under her chair, just listened. Not to what they said, but how they said it, like people who had been listened to their whole lives. At lunch, a researcher from Stanford leaned over and asked, "What lab are you from?" June hesitated. I'm not from any lab. Oh. He paused, then smiled. High school? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Someone else stepped in. She's the one who wrote the drift model. The table went silent. The genomic drift thing? Your Iowa chick? You're real? June nodded. The silence broke again, not rudely, not coldly, just stunned. One man chuckled softly. I thought you were a grad student trolling the forums. No, she said. I was in a chicken coop. By late afternoon, the small hall where the young innovators would present began to fill. No stage lights, no press, just chairs, screens, a pitcher of water. June was third to speak. She held her notes like they were glass. As the speaker before her stepped down, Dr. Monroe stood quietly at the back of the room. She gave no wave, no signal. Just a still, soft nod. June walked to the podium. She was small behind the lectern. She didn't adjust the microphone. She didn't clear her throat. She looked down once, then up, and began. I don't know how to introduce myself properly, she said, voice trembling. I don't have letters after my name. I don't have a school to represent. I didn't bring slides. Some in the room shifted. A few leaned forward. I came here because my mother died of ovarian cancer. No one moved. She didn't know she had it until it was too late. And no one told me why that happens. Why we don't see it sooner. Why the signs come so quietly and leave so loudly. She held up a single printed graph. Nothing fancy. No color. Just points on a plane. The familiar curve of drift. I don't research because I'm gifted, she said, voice steady now. I research because I'm grieving. The room went silent. I read about RNA in an old book. I taught myself PCA with internet videos. I wrote my first pipeline next to a dying cornfield with a busted radio. Pause. And I'm still here. A professor near the front, one of Weiss's colleagues, crossed his arms. But the model you suggest, it assumes stable expression profiles in early stages. That's not always the case. How do you control for variance in immune response? June didn't flinch. I don't, she said. Not yet. I just look for the parts that move before anyone notices. A younger postdoc raised her hand. Are you planning to publish your latest pipeline? June shrugged gently. If it's helpful. Sarah Tran, sitting near the back, smiled so softly it almost broke. When the talk ended, there was no applause at first. Just quiet. Then, slowly, the room rose to its feet. Not because she had dazzled them, but because she had centered them. Reminded them that beneath the grants and graphs and precision, there is always loss. And under loss, the hunger to understand. Later in the hallway, an old professor caught up to her. He walked with a cane, wore a brown tweed jacket, and his glasses hung on a cord around his neck. I worked on BRCA mutations in the 90s, he said. I thought I'd heard every angle. He tapped her folded graph. But you didn't ask how. You asked when. That's the question we've all been circling around. He extended his hand. Thank you. June shook it. And for the first time, she felt her hand not as a child's, but as a peer's. That night, in her small hotel room overlooking the Charles River, she opened her notebook. She wrote only one sentence. I didn't speak loudly. I just didn't lie. And for the first time in years, she slept without guilt. The day the paper was accepted, June was in the garden. She was kneeling in the dirt, coaxing sunflower seeds into cold soil, when her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. Subject: Manuscript approved for publication. From E. Monroe. June, Your paper, Early Phase Genomic Drift in Ovarian Cancer Risk Profiles, has been accepted by the Journal of Translational Oncology. Co-authors, J. Iverson, S. Tran, E. Monroe. The peer reviewers used the word elegant. Congratulations. June sat back on her heels. Her hands were covered in soil. The sky above was the soft gray of late spring. She didn't run inside. She didn't scream. She just looked out across the field toward the wreckage of the old Coop and whispered, "We did it, Mama." In Cambridge, the Harvard press office called it a breakthrough in early detection modeling. Local papers caught on. Teenage girl from Iowa changes how we detect cancer. From chicken coop to cancer research. Sarah sent her a photo of the printed journal, lying on a polished lab bench with her name in clean black font, J. Iverson. Then the emails began. Dozens. From labs, from biotech firms, from professors and venture capitalists and radio stations. They wanted interviews, podcasts, video series, internships, scholarships, photo shoots. A few wanted to buy her code. One email subject line read, "Let's make you the next science prodigy." June stared at that one for a long time. Then she deleted it. She did one interview, just one. With a local paper from Des Moines, a soft-spoken journalist with a voice like a librarian. The reporter asked, "Do you see yourself at Harvard next year? Or maybe Stanford?" June smiled faintly. "I see myself planting tomatoes." "But you're a published researcher." "I'm also 13. The Harvard team offered to fly her back out. She could spend the summer in Cambridge, work in Monroe's lab, maybe take early college courses, get a head start. Dr. Monroe didn't pressure her. She simply said, "The door is open. Come when you're ready." And June said no. Not forever. Just not yet. Instead, she stayed in Iowa. She logged into her Harvard account from the library each week, read papers, downloaded tools, reviewed new data sets Sarah sent her. But mostly, she returned to the quiet. She fixed the fence around the garden. She painted the chicken coop, not to rebuild it, but to bless it. A monument, not a workshop. She visited her mother's grave every Sunday. Sat beside the oak tree with her laptop and read her own paper out loud, softly, like telling a bedtime story. Some nights, when the wind was soft and the soil still smelled like life, she'd light the old flashlight and write again. Not for publication, just for herself, just to remember how it had started. One afternoon in June, she opened a letter. Inside was a formal offer. Harvard Medical School invites June Iverson to serve as Senior Youth Advisor to the Early Cancer Predictive Modeling Team. Remote participation, welcome. Travel at your discretion. She stared at the letter for a long while. Then she folded it and tucked it into her mother's cookbook, between two pages still stained with sugar and cinnamon. Then she walked outside. The sunflower had sprouted, thin, fragile, but reaching upward. He was sitting at the kitchen table. That alone was enough to stop June in her tracks. It was early evening, late summer. The corn outside had grown tall again. Cicadas hummed low in the fields. June had just come back from the library, a printout of a new research article folded in her bag. The door creaked as she stepped in. Her boots scraped the mat. Her breath caught. He was sitting there, sober. A mug of black coffee sat untouched in front of him. His hands were clasped, as if in prayer, though she had never seen him pray. She said nothing, just stood there, watching. Then his voice came, hoarse from disuse. "I found something." He didn't look up as he spoke. "It was in the crawl space, behind the heater. She must have hidden it." June slowly approached. Her father pushed a small cardboard box across the table. No label, Just dust and time and something almost sacred. His hands trembled slightly as he let go. "I think it's for you." Inside the box were letters. Dozens of them, folded neatly. Some still sealed. Some smudged by what looked like rain or tears or both. On top, a note, addressed in soft, familiar handwriting. "For June. When you're ready." She opened the first. "My June bug. If you're reading this, I'm probably not there. And I'm so sorry for that. I wanted to be. I fought like hell to be. I hope you're still asking questions. I hope you're still stubborn. I hope you've forgiven the world, even just a little." Each letter was different. One talked about how her mother had studied biology for a year before dropping out to raise a family. Another listed books she wished she'd read, poems she loved, recipes June had never seen. One ended with, "If you ever find a way to help someone else survive this, do it. And if you can't save me, that's all right. Just don't let the pain eat you. Let it build you." The last letter was shorter, scrawled, almost rushed, a thought caught in motion. "If your father ever sobers up long enough to give you this, that means he's trying. Please, June, don't let him drown in silence like I did in pain. Forgive him if you can. He was once kind. He was just never strong. You're strong for all three of us now. Love you forever. Mama." June folded the letter, carefully, reverently. Then for a long time she didn't speak. Her father still hadn't moved. His shoulders sagged as if bracing for something sharp. Finally, "Brandy," she said, "you read them too?" He nodded once, then added, barely audible, "Didn't know she still believed in me." June stared at him, not with softness, not yet, but with something close to curiosity. Then she whispered, "I didn't either." They sat like that for a long time. The cicadas outside rose louder, like waves crashing slowly on a shore. The house creaked in the heat, and the silence between them for once didn't feel cruel. Eventually, he said, "I don't know how to be useful." June looked at the box, then at him. "You just were." That night, she didn't open her laptop. She didn't run any models or write any code. She simply lit the old flashlight, climbed into her bed, and began rereading the letters aloud, slowly, one by one, as if she were 13 again and her mother were still somewhere close, just listening. In the morning, her father made breakfast, burned toast, runny eggs, a mug of coffee so bitter it felt like punishment. June ate every bite, not because it tasted good, but because he tried. That evening, she sat outside with her notebook and began sketching something new. Not a model, not an equation, a lesson plan, a way to explain DNA to kids. Color-coded beads to represent A, T, C, G. Simple animations, stories, maybe an app, maybe a little schoolhouse in the back of the property. She didn't know exactly what. But she knew this. The way to honor the dead is not just through discovery, but through continuation. It started with one question. A boy named Leo, missing his front tooth, asked June, "Is DNA like a recipe?" She blinked, then smiled. "Yes," she said, "it's exactly like that." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to coloring a paper model of a cell. That was the first Saturday of the little school. Just 5 kids. A plastic table under the shade of the maple tree. June had written, "Tiny Lab, Big Questions" on a cardboard sign and stuck it to the gate with duct tape. She didn't expect anyone to come, but they did. First, the neighbor's daughter, then a pair of cousins, then Leo, then 4 more the next week. No tuition, no tests, only questions, and crayons, and string. She taught with whatever she had. Beads from her mother's sewing box became nucleotides. Pipe cleaners became chromosomes. Old buttons made perfect cells. She showed them how A pairs with T and C with G. She didn't use words like polymerase or epigenetics. Not yet. She said, "Your body has a song inside it." And they listened. Each child got a notebook. On the cover, June had written by hand, "This book belongs to a future scientist." The kids filled them with drawings, patterns, half-formed ideas. Some pages were nonsense. Some were astonishing. One girl, Amelia, asked, "Can your DNA get sad?" June paused, then answered, "It can change when you're hurting. Not like crying, more like folding differently." "So it remembers?" "Yes," June said softly. "It remembers." By the third week, her father built a bench. By the fifth, he added a little whiteboard from the thrift store. He didn't say much, but he came early, left lemonade on the porch, and fixed the swing one of the boys broke. One morning, he brought out a toolbox and said, "I thought maybe we could build them a real table." June nodded, didn't speak, just handed him the drill. At night, she still checked in with Sarah and Dr. Monroe. They were beginning to adapt her model into a clinical tool, a slow, careful process. June offered notes when asked, but she let them lead. She wasn't needed at the center right now. She was needed at the edge, of the field, of the map, of someone else's beginning. One evening, she stayed late under the tree, watching the notebooks scattered in the grass. The sun dipped low, pouring gold across the soil. A girl named Jasmine had left behind a page filled with DNA spirals drawn in purple crayon. At the top, she had written, "This is what my mom's love looks like." June folded it carefully and kept it. Not as data, as truth. That night, she wrote a new program. Not a research tool. An app. Simple, bright, slow. Like a bedtime story. Kids could tap to see DNA unfold, zoom in on genes, match beads to traits. A tiny voice read the words aloud. "Your body remembers everything that made you, even the love." The voice, she decided, would be her mother's. She found an old voicemail, cleaned the audio, looped it gently. It was just one line. "You're doing good, Junebug. Keep going." By September, a letter came from Harvard. It wasn't an offer this time. It was a request. "We are building a new team focused on early cancer detection in underserved populations. Would you consider joining us as an official advisor, not just on the science, but on the human side?" June wrote back, "Only if I can keep teaching." Dr. Monroe replied simply, "That's why we want you." One chilly morning, Leo, the boy who once asked about recipes, looked up at June as she drew a spiral on the whiteboard. "Are you famous yet?" She laughed. "No. But you're on the internet. That doesn't make you famous." "What does?" June thought for a moment, then knelt down beside him. "When someone remembers what you taught them, even after they go home." Leo nodded seriously. "Then you're already famous." It had been 2 years since she first opened the book about DNA in the chicken coop. Now, at 15, June stood backstage in a modest auditorium at Harvard Medical School, not to listen, but to speak. She wore a simple gray sweater and black slacks, no heels, no blazer. The stage manager asked if she needed a podium. "No," she said gently. "I'll just stand." The opening convocation was full of new medical students, bright-eyed, brilliant, hopeful, the kind of students who had trained their whole lives to be here. And they were waiting to hear from her. Not because she was famous, but because she had something to say. The dean gave a short introduction. A few words about her paper, the advisory role, the early detection model. But June's name was not spoken with fanfare. It was spoken with reverence. Then the mic was hers. She stepped out. The room went quiet. "Good afternoon," she began, soft and sure. "My name is June Iverson. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a PhD. I don't even have a diploma yet." A soft ripple of laughter. "But a few years ago, I lost my mom to ovarian cancer. And after that, I started listening." She looked out over the students. Some were taking notes. Most had stopped. "I wasn't listening to professors or journals. I was listening to the body, to the places it breaks quietly before anyone notices, to the whisper before the scream." She paused. "I wrote my first research model with a flashlight, in a chicken coop, while my dad was drinking himself to sleep in the next room." Silence. No pity, just stillness. "I didn't research because I was gifted. I researched because I was grieving." She told them about PCA, about genomic drift, about the smell of wet straw, about planting sunflowers, about Leo and Jasmine and pipe cleaner chromosomes. She told them what no textbook ever does. The work we do isn't just about knowledge. It's about witnessing. To witness someone's pain and not turn away is a scientific act, a human act. We are not just here to fix. We are here to see. She ended the talk not with a citation or a quote from a journal, but with a story. "When I was 10, my mom gave me a tiny flashlight to use when the power went out," she said. "It didn't light up the room, just a corner." She held up that same flashlight now, worn, dented, but still working. "I carried it with me when she was dying. I used it to read about cells. I used it to write about cancer. I used it to find my way through the dark." She looked out over the silent room. 300 future doctors, and not a single breath out of place. Then she spoke the final line. "I did not grow up with light, but I carried one." There was no applause for a second. Then, slowly, almost reverently, the room rose. Not in excitement, but in gratitude. Hands clapped not for spectacle, but for witness. A room full of scientists standing for a girl who had once knelt in straw, holding data in one hand and grief in the other. Afterward, a girl, maybe 9 or 10, waited outside the hall with a shy smile. June knelt. The girl held out a folded note. Inside, it said, "My name is Abby. I study biology in the barn. There's mice in the roof, and my sister thinks I'm weird. But I want to make medicine, too. Do you think I can?" June wrote back on the same piece of paper. "Yes, Abby. The barn is the best place to begin." That evening, back in her hotel room, June lit the flashlight and set it on the table by the window. She looked out over Cambridge. No chicken coop, no broken roof, but the light was still the same. In Iowa, her father opened a letter from Harvard. It was addressed not to him, but to the Iverson family. Inside was a copy of her speech, printed in full. He read it once, then again, then placed it beside her mother's last letter under the sunflower June had pressed flat and saved. He whispered, "You did it, Junebug."